Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And we are going to be going over some of the stuff that went down in last night's draft. Hopefully, this is going to be a short video. I will admit right off the top of the bat here that prospect scouting is not exactly my forte, kind of a blind spot in my basketball knowledge. I don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to the college game and the overseas leagues either. So, not going to be a huge deep dive into all the prospects here. We're just going to go over maybe a couple of the big stories and then move on from there. So, with that massive disclaimer out of the way, we will jump into it. First and foremost, number one overall pick goes to San Antonio. They take Victor Wembanyama. I mean, yeah, that we pretty much knew that was going to happen. Wemby was going first pretty much no matter what. Fantastic talent, potential generational player. You've probably been hearing um all the good stuff about Wembanyama this whole way through, so we're not going to rehash the same stuff, but the Spurs get their guy. He was happy to be there, obviously, right? You saw on camera if you watch the draft, he's crying, he's emotional. And why not, right? All the work has paid off. He's in the NBA now, and he gets the chance to go out and prove himself. So Wemby goes first, very much expected. The second pick, though, is where things started to get a little bit more interesting. Well, interesting for different reasons. Let's put it that way. The Hornets basically had their choice between Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller. They opted for the latter. So they take Brandon Miller, the forward in that sort of wing position, as opposed to Scoot Henderson, who was another guard. And I don't know. There was a lot of talk about this. Some people sort of saw Scoot as the maybe better overall prospect, the guy who might be ready to go immediately, considering his experience with the G League Ignite. But the Hornets apparently valued, the wing more than another guard, which may have something to do with the fact that they had LaMelo already on the roster. Maybe they thought that going LaMelo plus Scoot was not in their best interest. Don't really know. In getting into the minds of the people in that war room is not really something that we can do. But Brandon Miller gives them size, gives them a strong scoring option, and picking up a forward, picking up a wing guy, right? That sort of maybe shooting guard, small forward hybrid, maybe gives us an indication of where the Hornets are looking to go moving forward. Obviously, Brandon Miller is going to be in his rookie season. They might sort of take his development a little bit slowly. I don't think he factors into being the number one option at that position immediately. But taking a player in that range, right? The sort of wing spot, to me indicates that the Hornets are at least preparing to move on from one or both of Gordon Hayward and Kelly Oubre Jr. Both of them are not signed beyond this season. So, depending on what their price tag demands, they could re-sign one or both of them. They could let them both go or trade them away and be relatively confident that Brandon Miller is there to hold down that spot for the foreseeable future. So, it was an interesting choice. We knew the Hornets had to make a tough one. They go for Brandon Miller, which does mean that Scoot Henderson goes to Portland at 3. And a lot of people were expecting Portland to move this pick. And they still might, right? There was no move made on draft night itself, but that doesn't mean that Portland couldn't still be looking to move things around. But the fact of the matter is, they take Scoot Henderson in a position that sets them up incredibly well for the future. If you look at this from the perspective of Portland won't make a move, won't try to sort of trade up for any sort of big name to help Lillard out this season, then you've got Scoot Henderson, you've got Anthony Simons, you've got I guess we'll throw Sharp in there, Shaden Sharp a little bit. Still want to see what he does over a full season, not just that little spurt he had at the end of the previous season where his numbers were going up after they decided that they were out of the play-in race. They got a lot of young talent. The question is, how will they use it, right? Because if they are looking to get Damian Lillard that one last championship contending roster, a lot of those guys are going to have to go. You're not going to be able to keep all of them. You're going to have to trade somebody to go get a big name. So we'll see who survives in Portland if they do make that trade. Because if they don't make that trade, now you start looking at, do they even potentially move Dame? Do you trade Lillard away? Do you try to go all in on this rebuild around this young talent? Because Lillard would certainly fetch you a pretty substantial price in terms of young players, draft picks, etc. So the fact that they take Scoot is not surprising. At that point, he's absolutely the best player left on the board, but the fact that he remains on the roster for now is the point that gets very, very interesting for the Trailblazers. So got to see what they're up to for the rest of the offseason. Moving along here, a kind of footnote-ish little move being made, but the Pacers did manage to pull something off here. They effectively swap places with the Wizards. It was the 7th and 8th picks that get traded. So Bilal Coulibaly, I think that's how you pronounce that, probably incorrect, and Jarris Walker just got swapped around. But in that process, the Pacers managed to grab 2 second-round picks. I believe they're both for the 2028 draft. So 2 second-rounders, people are probably saying, oh, who cares, whatever. And yeah, they're kind of right. But you got those 2 second-rounders, and all you had to do was go from the 7th pick to the 8th pick. So the Pacers probably still got the guy that they wanted originally in the first place, and you get a couple of extra picks to go along with it. Why not, right? Just stuff the war chest with as many picks as you can. Doesn't matter if they're firsts or seconds. Having them is better than not having them. So good on the Pacers. Get a little move in there. Then we move on to a team that was making quite a few more moves. The Dallas Mavericks. They took this in an interesting direction, sort of looking at multiple young prospects being brought on board. They made 2 moves, the first of which has already been confirmed. They gave up, I think it was the 10th pick that they had. They got back the 12th pick from the Oklahoma City Thunder, which turned into Derek Lively II. But in that move, they also moved, I'm saying moved too much, but it can't be helped. They got rid of Davis Bertans and his contract. That went over to the Thunder. So it feels like a pretty good move. Bertans had sort of fallen out of the lineup a little bit for the Mavs. He was not really living up to his price tag, which honestly was only about 16 million. It wasn't like he was eating a massive amount of space, but 16 million for a guy who's not really doing much for you off the bench anyway, you might as well get him out of there. You get a young player in exchange. You only move down 2 spots. So a solid move there. Then comes the other trade that the Mavs make later in the evening. This one, as of last night, was still reportedly being done. I'm not sure if it was ever made official, but if it is, the Mavericks reportedly ended up getting, this is another name I'm going to get wrong, but Olivier Maxence Prosper, as well as Richaun Holmes from the Sacramento Kings. So all of a sudden you have 3 guys here being brought in. 2 of them are literally fresh prospects. Richaun Holmes is a little bit more experienced, but you bring in these guys, you get rid of Bertans. So if you're the Mavericks, are you maybe looking at a big man by committee kind of approach? Instead of having one guy that we're going to say, this is our starting center, this is what we're going to work with, it could be a situation where they're looking at maybe a rotation of 2 or 3 guys, a couple of them being very young, fresh out of the draft, and try to come at it from that approach. Split those minutes among multiple prospects and young players and try to go that way. To me, that is an indication that maybe they're looking at not bringing back guys like Christian Wood, guys like Dwight Powell, who are both looking for new contracts here. So the downside to that is I don't know how much guys like Luka and potentially Kyrie Irving, who they're still trying to re-sign, are going to really feel about having big men options who are relatively fresh, relatively untested. But if you're the Mavericks, this could be a scenario where you are offloading contracts like Bertans and picking up these young players because you are trying to save money to make sure that Kyrie Irving stays signed. If he is going back to the Mavericks, it is going to be for a just stupidly high amount of money. So if you're the Mavericks, maybe you're looking to shore up the rest of your lineup with younger, cheaper guys. That would be my thought process there. No guarantees that that's what they're looking for. They may very well have just liked those prospects in particular and wanted to go get them, but that's a little bit more of a boring story. So we're going to try and spice things up a little bit. So that does it for the Mavs on that front. One other team that I do want to talk about here is the Orlando Magic, which, yeah, I know. We don't really do a whole lot of talking about the Magic in modern NBA discussion, but we should for this video because they did something very interesting. They took two guards in the top 12. They took one at 6 and one at 11. And normally you wouldn't really care about that too much, right? Best available, pick whatever. Don't worry about the fit until later. For the Magic, though, there was a little bit of a story here, right? So they take two guards in the top 12. You assume they have to be moving someone. Someone's either being traded or not being re-signed because their roster already has about 4 or 5 guards. They have, just to list them off, Cole Anthony, Markelle Fultz, Gary Harris, and Jalen Suggs all signed right now for this season. They've also got Michael Carter-Williams on a team option that they could potentially pick up. So they have a lot of guys in that guard position. That is split between the 1 and the 2. Obviously, those 5 guys that I mentioned. So maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but adding 2 more young guards to a stable of already relatively young guards is an interesting move, and there was a tweet or an article or something the day of the draft that sort of mentioned that if the Magic do opt to draft another guard, they might be looking to trade somebody already on their roster. That trade did not, as far as I'm aware, go down on the draft night itself, but that could now be coming with these 2 new young guys picked up. So keep an eye on the Magic. Might be looking to make a move. They've certainly been stockpiling assets for quite a while in the post-Dwight Howard rebuild era. Maybe now's the time for them to cash in some of those chips, but we will have to see. And that really brings me to one final point here. It's not really about a team in particular, about one player, and that player is Cam Whitmore, a guy who did not have a great night last night. He was projected. Most of the places I saw had him somewhere between like 5th and 8th in terms of mock drafts. There were some that had him as high as 4. I don't think I saw any mock draft that had him taken outside of the top 10, though, right? So that's the kind of guy we're looking at here. His quote-unquote worst-case scenario was still being a top 10 pick. So he was supposed to be a very highly coveted prospect. Instead, he slides all the way down to 20th off the board, and he is taken by the Houston Rockets, who actually also had the pick earlier that was projected to be Cam Whitmore, the 4th pick that someone was saying could have potentially been that spot. So Houston ends up getting Whitmore anyway. But it was asking a lot of questions, right? How does a guy who is supposed to go somewhere between 5 and 8, no worse than 10, end up sliding to 20th? The answer was apparently some health concerns, right? The wording is vague, the news itself was vague, but that was apparently what was contributing to some teams either dropping him off their boards or taking him off the board entirely, was that he had some unspecified health concerns that teams were a little bit scared of. And to be honest, that's understandable. If you've got a pick in the top 10, top 15, you're looking for a guy who is going to have an impact, either immediately in the case of the first 4 or 5 picks, or within a year or 2, even if it's just off the bench, if you're in that lottery. So a guy who has health concerns that may keep him from playing entirely is going to be seen by a lot of those teams as too much of a risk for them to take. Houston was willing to take that risk at 20, though, mostly because they already had a top 5 pick. They got a guy that they thought could contribute immediately, so now they're willing to sort of circle back around at 20 and say, hey, this guy has some health concerns, but if he's healthy, if these health concerns are not something that keeps him off the court, we effectively got 2 top 5 caliber guys for the 4th pick and the 20th pick. So it is a gamble, but one that Houston's definitely willing to take, and one that Houston can absolutely afford. They are bad. That I couldn't think of a better word. They're not a good team right now. They won 22 games last season, so they are willing to take this kind of risk. If it doesn't pay off, then the rebuild goes on full steam ahead. If it does pay off, maybe that rebuild gets to take an extra step forward a little bit faster with Cam Whitmore. So if you're Houston, you really don't have too much to lose. But other than that, it was just kind of the normal levels of fluctuation as far as I was concerned. You had some guys who maybe moved a couple spots up. I think Bilal Koulibaly was one of them. Mock drafts had him sort of like 10 to 12. He ends up going 7th because the Pacers and Wizards were making that trade. But nothing too massive. Of course, I could be completely wrong on that because, again, I am not intimately familiar with the games of all of these prospects. So there could have been more stuff than that I just missed out on. But this is what I was able to sort of gather and what got my attention from watching most of the draft last night. I'll admit I sort of started tuning out around the late 40s, early 50s in terms of those picks, but got through got through most of it. But yeah, some thoughts on the draft. There are a couple of interesting stories. Obviously, we'll probably go into depth a little bit more on some of them when the early off-season preview videos start coming out, which should actually start coming out around the same time that this one does. I am actually getting started on recording and editing those right now. So we'll see if any of these stories make it over to those. But for now, that will be it. Let me know what you thought. If there was any other stories in the draft that caught your attention, if there were any details of the trades and moves I did talk about that you wanted to go into further detail about, feel free to do so. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.